What's up? Today, I'm gonna learn about Intel Core Ultra 7. And I'm using Intel's the worst one, Intel Core i7 from 14th generation, and it is so bad, like terrible. So that's why I want to renew my PC, and also I want to learn about Core Ultra 7, also Ryzen. Let's get started.
As for the 265K, it features 8 P cores with 8 threads, as again, hyper-threading is no longer used for the Arrow Lake architecture. The P cores feature a base frequency of 3.9 GHz and a boost of 5.5 GHz, and that's a mere 2% frequency reduction when compared to the Core i7 14700K. Then there are the E cores, and in total we have 12, again with 12 threads as there is no SMT support. The cores operate at a base frequency of 3.3 GHz but can clock as high as 4.6 GHz, which is actually a 7% increase when compared to the E cores featured.
So generally, this Core Ultra 7 is better than Core i7 14th generation. That's not surprising, but I think it's just less trouble and upgraded
On the
maybe
14700K. In total, there's 30 megabytes of L3 cache and 36 megabytes of L2 cache, and that's seen when combining the L2 cache of the P and E cores. The P cores each receive 3 megabytes of L2 cache, whereas the E cores get 4 megabytes per cluster, and each cluster consists of 4 cores. Finally, the base TDP is 125 watts with a max turbo set at 250 watts. And for this, Intel is charging $395 US per 1,000 units. It's also worth noting that all K-SKU models, which are currently the only models that have been announced, support dual-channel DDR5 5600 UDIMM memory or DDR5 6400 CUDIMM memory. And in short, CUDIMM memory features a small clock driver circuit directly on the module, and this allows for more precise timings that are required at higher memory speeds. All models provide 20 PCIe 5.0 lanes and 4 PCIe 4.0 lanes, along with a direct media interface 4.0 8-lane bus to the chipset. As usual, the K-SKU parts have an unlocked clock multiplier and therefore can be overclocked. Now for our testing, we have multiple different test systems, so rather than discuss all of the hardware and configurations, you're welcome to pause the video here and study the test system specs. And once you've done that, you can move on to the benchmark graphs. First up, let's take a look at how the 265 behaves under load. And again, for cooling, I'm using the new MSI.
So motherboard 14th. Oh, okay.
MSI has created a unique bracket that migrates the cold plate north for a 3-degree reduction in temperature, as it better targets the hotspot on these new Arrow Lake CPUs. So with the Core Liquid i360 strapped on, I loaded up the 265K with Cinebench, where we saw an average clock frequency of 4.6 GHz on the E cores and 5.2 GHz on the P cores, and this was achieved while remaining within the stock 250 watt power limit. The CPU saw a peak temperature of just 84 degrees, which is well below the 105 degree TJ max. Now for a look at the Cinebench multi-core performance, and here we see that the 265K is good for just shy of 2,200 points, making it 8% faster than the 14700K and 18% faster than the 9900X. So we're looking more at 7950X and 14900K levels of performance in this test. The single core performance is also very strong, with the P cores capable of 145 points, and that's a 4% increase from the 9900X and 14% faster than the 14700K. Now, when it comes to power consumption, the 265K consumes 218 watts, which is around the same power draw we saw from the 12900K, 14600K, 7950X, and 9950X.
Oh, so That's that's nice. Core i7 14th generation is 308 and Core Ultra 7 is 200. So 3 and 2. That's really better.
As we just saw, performance was comparable to the 7950X, so power efficiency is roughly on par with that part in this particular workload. It was also 8% faster than the 14700K, and yet here we see power consumption has been reduced by almost 100 watts, and that's an impressive 29% saving. All of that said, the more efficient Ryzen parts, such as the 7950X 3D, did deliver a similar level of performance to that of the 265K, while consuming 33% less power. Moving on to file compression performance, we see that the 265K is actually slightly slower than the 14700K, trailing by a 6% margin when using the same DDR5 7200 memory. Performance was also comparable to the 9900X.
Almost
The
same.
265K falls even further behind the 14700K when it comes to decompression performance, and this is due to a lack of SMT support. This time, using the same memory, it's 15% slower and 18% slower than the 9900X, so that's a fairly disappointing result. The Blender Open Data test has more positive results for the 265K, as here it is 7% faster than the 14700K and 8% faster than the 9900X, basically delivering 14900K light performance, so I think given the power savings that's pretty good. Now looking at the Corona 10 benchmark data, we find 14900K and 9900X light performance, making the 265K 10% faster than the 14700K. Now we have the Photoshop 2025 data, and here the new Arrow Lake CPUs are pretty underwhelming. And I'm still looking into these results, as these new CPUs should be faster in this workload, but as it stands for our configuration, the two underwhelming, given that the 265K is slower than the 14700K and therefore the 9900X. Okay, time for the gaming benchmarks, and we'll start with Star Wars Jedi Survivor, where the 265K is pretty crap, if I'm being honest, coming in behind all competing parts. Using the same DDR5 7200 memory, it was 10% slower than the 14700K, 9% slower than the 9700X, and even 6% slower than the 9900X, which isn't exactly known to be a great gaming CPU. Of course, if you are after elite levels of gaming performance, you'd be more interested in the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, and in that comparison, the 265K is almost 30% slower. Quite well, slightly beating the 14900K and then 10% faster than the 9900X, and were really bad in our 285K review, and we suspected this could be a scheduling issue, so we disabled the E-cores within the BIOS, but that didn't seem to improve things. Yet, despite that, performance does improve when enabling the Prioritize P-cores setting under the Hybrid CPU Utilization option, boosting performance by around 15%. A lot better than what we were seeing previously, but sadly, that is still massively disappointing. Performance in Hogwarts Legacy is very mid-tier, and that is to say that the 265K is more than it is the 9700X. PC, coming in slower than the 12K, is providing 14700K light performance, making it slightly faster than the 9900X, but 7% slower than the 9700X and 15% slower than the 7800X 3D. Now I've updated our example and solution to the poor performance for this title either. The 265K is slower than even the 14600K, which meant it was...
For me, I'm not a gamer and I don't need that much frame rate, so I think it's good enough.
13% slower. Compared to the Zen 5 parts, Intel at least margin, and that meant it was slower. So a 6% margin in this example. When gaming, we see the 265K is comparable to the 9900X based on this Cyberpunk data. The only issue being the 265K didn't perform that well in this game, especially in the section that we use for benchmarking. Therefore, The Last of Us Part 1 is a better game to look at power efficiency for these Arrow Lake CPUs, and here the 265K consumed 5% less power than the 9900X for 12% more performance. So that's a great result. That said, it's not the best result Core Ultra 7 265K doesn't stack up very well, coming in 8% slower than the 14700K and 4% slower than the 9900X. And as I've said, the Ryzen 9 processor isn't a particularly good gaming CPU. It's also wild to consider that just a few months ago, you could purchase the 7800X 3D for just $340 US. And in fact, let's take a look at the cost per frame data now based on...
So, generally speaking, Ryzen is better for frame rate, and Core i7 from 14th generation is better at frame rate, but so much high energy consuming, and the new one, Core Ultra 7, is little bit less the gaming or these kind of things less score, but the efficiency of energy is better, like improved. So for me, the 14th generation Core i7 is causing blue screen, so the renewing the Core Ultra 7 might be good thing for me. And I have never used Ryzen, and I think it's okay, but I'm not sure. Let me know on the comment about Ryzen.
current retail pricing. So even after finding ways to boost performance in Homeworld 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, Arrow Lake still sucks really bad for gaming, so that's fun. When it comes to value, the 265K does stack up far better than the 285K did, thanks to the fact that it costs almost 40% less while being just 5% slower across the 14 games we tested. This means it's actually quite similar to the 9900X in terms of value, slightly better even. But as I've said a few times now, if you primarily care about gaming performance, the 9900X isn't 20% better. Following on from our 285K review, things don't look too Cyberpunk numbers do or test certain games like Cyberpunk and A Plague Tale Requiem under lighter CPU loads. It'd probably be possible to produce results that allow Arrow Lake to match Raptor Lake, delivering the parity data that Intel promised us. But as I found in my 285K review, if you place these Arrow Lake CPUs under heavy load in games, for whatever reason they tend to fall in a heap, and that's exactly what we saw in A Plague Tale Requiem. Whether or not this is something Intel can address remains to be seen, but I sure hope it is, otherwise Arrow Lake is going to be an epic fail. So far, the greatest improvement for Arrow Lake can be seen when monitoring power usage, and this was always expected to be the case. We just hoped that gaming performance would be much better than it is. The 265K is more efficient than the 285K, and does reach a point where it's very similar to the 12.
I'm not sure. What is your choice? I'm not sure. How do you think? Ryzen, Intel, Core Ultra. I'm not sure about the lineup yet, but Ryzen, Intel Core Ultra 9 and 7 and 5, right? And the 265K kind of things is I'm not sure about that. These are the like maybe Core Ultra 7 and 2 or 3 lineup, or I'm not sure, but the 265K Core Ultra 7. And Core Ultra 9 285K. I'm not sure. I think that that might be the Ultra 7 and the 200 blah blah blah, and higher is better, and these kind of things maybe.
12 and 16 core Ryzen models, at least the ones without 3D V cache like the 7950X 3D, is essentially dead on arrival. Even if Intel manages to fix the gaming performance and genuinely finding parity with the 14700K, at that point you'd only be looking at 7700X like gaming performance for a 45% price premium. Of course, the productivity performance of the 265K is much better, but if you're after a good balance of gaming and productivity performance, the 7950X 3D is a much better choice at $480 US.
Oh, really? And I'm curious about the AI CPU kind of thing. I'm not sure about the name, how it's called. The using AI with the CPU.
And of course, we have the Zen 5 based X3D chips just around the corner, so parts like the 265K and 285K are facing some serious competition. As I said when wrapping up my 285K review, I fully expect Intel to iron out the kinks in the coming weeks, which it should help a bit, but I can't imagine it's going to be enough to save Arrow Lake. But I really hope I'm wrong about that. For now though, I am done with this initial review of the 265K. Let me know.
Right. I'm not sure what your thought and what did you choose? Intel Ryzen, and I think whichever it's usually alright, but I'm so sad the blue screen of Intel 14th generation. So I thought it was whichever okay, but I picked one not good one, Intel 14th generation. So I want to know. Next one, Intel Core Ultra 7 265K CPU review and benchmark vs 285 245K. I think it's the Ryzen, the 7800X3D and so on.
In this review. So the 265K again is $404, which is fitting because Arrow Lake value can't be found. The price has it similar to the 7900X, which is currently $400. The 7900 non-X is $370 or so, with the 9700X at $330. The 9900X is $430. AMD has this territory completely encircled with similarly priced options. The 7800X 3D comes in 19% more expensive at $480 and would be less viable in production use cases we test, but far more viable in gaming scenarios. If you're only doing one of those two types of workload typically, that allows you to either ignore or focus on the 7800X 3D. If you're doing both, that'd be where the 265K might make sense. Basically, if you're splitting your daily use of the computer between really heavy work type applications and gaming. If it's not beaten by Intel's own 14700K at $350 or it's 13700K at $290, that would be where the 265K has a chance. And then AMD has also announced its 9800X 3D, or whatever they call it, for November 7th. We're not sure what it's going to cost yet. It is very likely it's not a direct comparison unless they really surprise everyone with the pricing, just because we'd expect it to be at 7800X 3D levels or higher. And that right now is $480. It's been as low as in the 300s in the past, but it hasn't been there for a little while. So as a reminder, other considerations for Arrow Lake, again, include the entirely new platform. So Z890, LGA 1851 means you'd be buying into a new board. These boards are some of the most expensive we've ever seen for this class. Oh. And in some cases we've seen, it can also be benefited disproportionately by higher memory speed, but that gets more expensive than potentially just buying one of the other CPUs that can cut costs and corners. As a positive though, the reduced power consumption means reduced cooler requirements as compared to Intel prior generations. It's not going to be as compared to AMD. It's lower power, generally speaking, across the board. Some 9950X, stuff like that, are a little different. But anyway, that's kind of where it lines up, and that's it for the basics and the positioning. If you want more Check out any of the last videos. We'll link them all in the description for you to make it easy. And otherwise, let's just get right into it this time. Our efficiency testing has been explained in depth in 2 pieces now and briefly introduced in a 3rd. To learn more about what we're doing here, check out our 285K review and our preceding video where we set up our monstrous test bench that you're looking at now. We'll start with 7-zip compression efficiency. We're just going to go with the ATX 12V and EPS 12V rails for this because we think these are the closest to accurate on our setup. The 265K ended up at 163 watts in this test, which has the efficiency at 968 MIPS per watt. That has the CPU as less efficient than the 285K, which pulled 162 watts on the same ATX 12V and EPS 12V rails, but produced a higher throughput, yielding a 1051 MIPS per watt result. AMD's 7800X 3D, 7700, 9700X, and everything else, including the 3700X from 2019, ranks above the 265K result. The 265K really is only better than the 9950X, the 2700, the 5800X, and Intel's own lineup here. In decompression efficiency, the 265K repeats its rank and falls below the 1194.9 MIPS per watt result of the 285K. The power drawn is the same since this test suite runs both consecutively and at about the same power level. The end result is that the 265K is marginally less efficient than the 245K, more meaningfully behind the 285K, and is otherwise mostly just ahead of the prior Intel CPUs. Generationally, the improvement on the 14700K is
so much information. I'm so confused. Okay.
actually good. It's 47% test. Now for gaming efficiency testing, this is still imperfect and it's something we're still developing. So we're going to keep tuning this. There'll be some changes as we continue to iterate on the gaming efficiency benchmarks, mostly because of Asus's change to pull from the 24-pin. That's really complicated things for us. So this is what we've got. We feel pretty good about it overall. It's calibrated. We want to do some further finer tuning though, so just be aware of that. All right, so here the 265K pulled 89 watts when measuring both the ATX 12V and the EPS 12V rails. That has it similar to the 285K. We noticed during this testing an initially higher reading on the 265K. It was almost 10 watts exactly, but after troubleshooting vCore, CPU package power, and a bunch of other power numbers in the charts, we were able to isolate that 10 watts as being from the measurement tool difference on the 265K platform that we used. 14900K has a lower power
efficiency.
consumption of the 14.7 as a result of external bottlenecking, limiting CPU utilization, also binning. It can't fully be leveraged, and so that's why we see that difference there. 285K and 265K are both fully engaged, though. Dragon's Dogma 2 is up. In this one, the 265K ran at 99 FPS average, which has it 4.6% ahead of the 245K, and it has the 285K about 4 to 5 FPS ahead of the 265K. The 14700K leads the 265K by 8.6%, with the 13700K about the same. The AMD 7800X 3D is ahead by 11%, with the cheaper 5700X 3D also ahead of the 265K while running on an older, cheaper platform. The 265K is worse value than even the 245K in this particular game, and we wouldn't recommend that one either. Its low performance here is fine, with no particularly meaningful deviation from the expectation, but overall, the two now with a 7.5% uplift in frame rate, lows increased proportionally with the average. This positions the 265K as equivalent to the AMD 7700X and a bit ahead of the 7700 and 7900 non-X parts. The 7900X is functionally tied with the 265K, making it both performance and price matched in this test. K ends up sandwiched between the 14600K and 13600K as we bounce off of a K 1%. It's basically error though. The 14700K leads the 265K by 2.4%. And the 285K did well in this particular test. It managed to outrank the 14900K, leading the 265K by 5.8.
So on Premiere, Adobe Premiere, Core Ultra 9 is the best, and 14th generation i9, Core i9, and Core i7 and AMD, and Core i9 from 13th generation, and AMD, and Core Ultra 7. So I think that's not much difference on my use. but mm, it would be mm, great. It was great if it was great that Core Ultra is better than Core i7 14th generation. Maybe the use of the electric energy, and kind of things, batteries, electric power, these kind of things might connect it, but.
Percent. So that's it for this one. A couple things to point out here. The 265K is, in several of the cases that we've tested, less efficient than the 285K. A couple reasons for that. One is efficiency, again, is a calculation involving the power consumed doing a task and then the actual output of that task. And so 285K performs better in those tasks. That's going to bump it positively. It is still more efficient than its predecessor from the 14th gen, but it's not always more performant. So that's kind of the trade-off. Now, in all comparisons we run, AMD is more efficient still, and that kind of wraps up that side of the efficiency equation. As we recap the charts overall, it's clear once again that the 265K is surrounded by good options on all sides. The 285K is exceptionally bad value for gaming users. It is actually impressive how bad the value is. The performance is worse than what you'd get on a $230 5700X3D in a lot of cases for the 285K, or a $480 7800X3D in all cases for gaming. And also it costs a lot more than the 7800X3D. So that's the 285K. In non-gaming uses, there are some limited scenarios where you could make an argument for the 285K, but they are relatively rare among our test suite in terms of the value proposition. The 245K made even less sense. The production use, you make an argument for older Intel, especially with the prices coming down, but those two make the most sense depending on the budget the user has. Getting cheaper, Intel starts to make more sense. Like the 12600KF was something like $80 recently at Best Buy, so that's kind of crazy. But otherwise, that's kind of how it stacks up. And then for production use cases, again, you can make an argument in some of these applications. It's just not a sweeping victory, and Arrow Lake has external issues where Intel, as we said in the 285K review, didn't even know what it was shipping. It asserted very clearly that APO would be on by default on everything. And that's back to 13th gen. And it simply was not. And while APO has no real impact in our test suite, which is why we didn't include it here again, because like at most we were seeing.
Okay, so I got the general things. I understand the general things. And I don't know about the AI things by the CPU. And what I want to search about that. NPC. I'm not sure how to search about that. I want to know about the AI thing, but IGP. Oh, so iGPU can be the like graphic board is maybe better, but I think if people getting Core i7 or 9 kind of thing, the Ultra 7, Ultra 9 might get the graphic board, so that might be not the great things for desktop. Maybe for